Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's weekly options watch list. Hopefully, you all had a wonderful weekend and enjoyed the extra day off with the market being closed here today. So, before I get into the 5 plays that I'm looking at for the upcoming week, I want to do a quick breakdown of the ES futures here and what we could be looking at for this shorter week and where we potentially could go. So, let's start off here on the daily time frame. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can see that the structure is still very bearish. Nothing has changed really about its structure. We have these negatively stacked EMAs. We're in a deceleration stage, trading well below the 21 EMA. Bearish on the histogram on the daily squeeze here. Here the histograms are. And everything about it is just looking very, very weak. That being said, we are quite extended to the downside here, kind of hitting right around with today's trading session. It did bump up a little bit to about that -2 ATR, but we do have a gap that does need to get filled here eventually around the 3900 level. So we could see that happen this week as we came down to these extended levels. We do need to give it a breather and have a reversion, and this 21 EMA does coincide well with this gap here, so that could be a nice level for us to look to as long as this market can push itself up. The path of least resistance, though, is still to the downside, so if we can get this pump up here to fill this gap, that would, in my opinion, be a good place to add a few more shorts due to the market still having very, very bearish structure. Now, if we come to the weekly time frame, we can see that usually anytime we get touches or a little bit below that -2 ATR in the weekly time frame, we do set ourselves up for a nice reversion. So you can see we came down here once, bounced up, came down here a few times before we bounced up, and then the same story here. We came down near that level, bounced to the 8 EMA, and now that we're well actually below that level, I would look again for another bounce up to that 8 EMA, which is also close to that gap as well. So if we can this week get that bounce, that would be a great place, in my opinion, to add some shorts due to us finally officially firing this weekly squeeze to the downside. We were in this low compression squeeze for a very long time, and it has finally fired to the downside. And once a squeeze fires, it usually lasts anywhere from 8 to 10 bars, and because we are on the weekly time frame, that would be 8 or 5 to 8 potential weeks of more selling. But once again, ideally want to see this reversion back and a gap fill before the market decides to roll over more. So this is definitely what I'm keeping my eyes on for the ES for this upcoming shorter week. That being said, let's go into the 5 plays that I'm looking at for the upcoming week. Most of them are to the downside. One of them is to the upside, just due to the overall market looking bearish, but we could easily get a bounce this week. So the first one here is going to be AMC to the downside. We have negatively stacked EMAs. Our price action is holding perfectly below that 21 EMA and cannot really break out above that +1 ATR. So I do like this one to the downside. Our squeeze histogram is below that 0 line. Price action's been rejecting the 21. So look for an entry around that 21 EMA, and then if the market does continue to roll over, AMC should go as well. I'd say your first target's going to be this prior low here, and then below that, look for all or new time lows here around that -3 ATR. Next one on the list here is Beyond, which has been in a very, very strong downtrend. And I think that will just continue because that is the path of least resistance. So we have negatively stacked DMAs. We're in a deceleration stage, and price action cannot get back above that 21 EMA to save its life here. Every time it gets nears it, it just falls quite drastically to the downside. And with this daily squeeze setting up here, I think that if you get another push back up to the 21, it will once again continue to fall to the downside. So this one looks very good in my opinion to short as well. Alright, the only trade that I like to the upside this week is Monster Beverage. If we zoom in here, we can see we have positively stacked EMAs. Our price action is holding basically right at that 21 EMA. Would like to see this bearish momentum here on the squeeze transfer over to that yellow, so it means it's losing that bearish momentum. but overall its structure here is still looking very solid to the upside, and with the market having some aggressive selling here the last few weeks, this has been holding up quite well compared to a lot of other stocks that have just been plummeting. So if the market can get a bounce this week, this one should make a nice move higher in my opinion. Alright, next on the list here is Roblox. This one is a trade to the downside as well. Once again, we have our negatively stacked EMAs, which shows us that we are in a nice downtrend. We have our price action kind of rejecting this 8 EMA here this last few days. Ideally want to get a retest of this 21 and reject that level, and that would be your ideal entry to the downside. Once you can get that rejection of the 21 EMA, look for a retest of these previous lows, and that would be a great place in my opinion to take some profits. And then last but not least here, we have Sentinel-1 here, another trade to the downside. Negatively stacked DMAs, deceleration, so once again we know it's in a nice downtrend. Its structure has been rejecting that 21 every time to the downside, and we have nice bearish momentum on the squeeze histogram, and ideally we'd like to see this come touch the 21 and reject it once again to the downside and retest these previous lows. And if it can retest those previous lows, that'd be a great place in my opinion to take some profits. So these are the top 5 stocks I'm looking at for the upcoming week. Hopefully it gives you all a few other things you can keep your eyes on as well. And let's go out there on Tuesday and start making some money, everybody.